Hello, and welcome to the Citizens of Craft podcast, where we explore the objects we love, the reasons we love them, and the people who bring them to life. I'm your host, Megan Black. In my job as the director of the Canadian Crafts Federation, I have the absolute honor of meeting craftspeople from across Canada and beyond who dedicate their lives to the creation of artistic, skillful, and captivating objects. Woodworkers, glass sculptors, jewelers and potters, textile artists, fashion designers, furniture makers, and more. You name it, there's someone out there making it and making it well. These are the citizens of craft. They are masters in their own right, chasing techniques that have been in use for thousands of years and exploring new technologies that have just begun to push the boundaries of art. They create objects with meaning, history, and purpose, rejecting the mass-manufactured lifestyle of our time to capture something more authentic, something that fascinates, something that matters, something that tells the story of who we are. Join me as we explore that story through the 10 manifesto statements of the Citizens of Craft movement, from You Are Not a Lemming to Cookie Cutter Doesn't Cut It, and Vases Are People Too. We'll discuss these ideas and so much more by talking with the people who bring them to life, the Citizens of Craft. Joining us today are two craft professionals from opposite ends of the country, jewelry and mixed media artist Kari Woo, calling in from Canmore, Alberta, and the ever-enthusiastic author, curator, craft historian, and university professor, Dr. Sandra Alfoldy, is joining us from Halifax. Thank you so much to both of you for being here.
Oh, it's so great to be here.
So welcome to the premiere episode of the Citizens of Craft podcast. I'm so excited.
Me too.
I'm excited too.
So I just want to start with a little visual description just to kind of set the scene for our listeners. Can you tell me a little bit about where you're at right now, like where your surroundings are, and give us a little description, Kari?
Well, sitting beside me, I have a handmade mug by some local Alberta artists that I'm sipping my water out of. I'm in the middle of a closet reconstruction, so it's a little bit of chaos, but my craft skills help immensely in such projects.
And Sandra, what about you? Where does it look like where you are today?
Well, and I'm going to take my surroundings are in my dining room where I have my ceramics collection from artists from across the country, which I've been collecting for many, many years now.
Oh, lovely. Oh, I'm jealous. I wish we were all in that room.
They're just little. There's nothing big in here.
A little bit about that. Tell me a little bit about the start of your journey and maybe what made you fall in love with craft to begin with, and maybe those objects will inspire some of that.
For me, I've always been crafty, even as a small person. And my mom, growing up, she did dough art, and there was a lot of creativity in our household. But I think what really congealed it for me is I had a good friend in high school, and his mom was an art collector. And every time I walked into that house, I was transformed, and I just remember thinking to myself, I want this. I want to be surrounded by art and handmade objects. And so I am, even amidst my closet reconstruction. I've got paintings on all of our walls that are by local artists or friends I went to school with. We've got woven baskets in the house. We have woven tapestries on our floors and as our tea towels. And we just try to have the handmade surround us. And it really it impacts our quality of life to a great degree. And I'm just so happy that our son is growing up surrounded by that kind of beauty.
And I'm very similar to Kari. I grew up as the daughter of two professional craftspeople, so it just was a way of life. It's funny how you just expect, like you were saying, Kari, about your son, to grow up surrounded by those things. It becomes part of who you are, and you turn to the handcrafted before you turn to the industrial and made. And it's just something that I feel so innately. And so growing up, it was just a matter sometimes of necessity. What mom and dad would barter and trade with other people at the craft fairs. That's what you were eating your dinner off of. But now in my house, it's a choice, and it's a very conscientious choice. And like Kari said, I really hope my sons grow up to appreciate the handcrafted as well. And it's something that they've been surrounded with their whole life, so they don't really have a choice at this point in time.
Well, I hope that kind of permeates their lives growing up as well as, or as much as it did for both of you. I very much came from a place that didn't have a whole lot of that when I was growing up, and sort of found my way into this world. So it's interesting to see how, sometimes it's nurture and sometimes it's nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think too, a lot of people turn to it because it's something that is so precious in a way. Like, people are really attracted to it. There's an innate value that people see and they respond to it.
Mm-hmm. So you both mentioned how you were surrounded by craft at a young age. Did you always want to, or did you always think that you would pursue a career in craft?
Well, from a really young age, I remember, as a young person, adults always ask, and I do this now to the young people in my life. Well, not as much as it was done to me, but what do you want to be when you grow up was a common question. And I would always, from the youngest age, answer an artist. And, and I know at a certain age, there was some dissuasion that happened, that clearly that didn't dissuade me well enough because here I am. But I did have that sense, and it was always my first and most innate ability to work with my hands. And, and I'm a three-dimensional thinker as well. And so that always kind of came through in the projects I would do at school, or, the things I would do in my spare time at home.
I'm kind of jealous of Kari. I thought I'd grow up to be a maker too, but I wasn't any good at it. So I went away to university and did a studio degree. And I realized two things. I wasn't very good at it, and that I wanted to be around craft. And then I got really indignant about craft. When I was doing my undergraduate degree, there were no craft courses, and things that I was making with paper and books and things were frowned upon. And that really motivated me, along with discussions with my parents, to say, hey, this is worth pursuing in terms of a art history degree.
And we're so glad you did that, Sandra.
Oh, Kari, you're so good. And I'm so glad that you didn't leave the studio.
So, like, everybody's story is unique, and there's commonalities that kind of drift between everyone who ends up in the craft world, but everyone takes that different path. And to get to that path, we all wear a whole lot of different hats. So, whether it's teacher or maker, curator, board member, even an activist, we all wear all of those roles in one way or another. And those particular roles fit so well with the Citizens of Craft manifesto. And the specific statement that we're talking about in this episode today is, you are not a lemming. You're not a follower. You trust your own tastes and live by them. So, what we've been talking about so far really fits into that. But what were your thoughts when you heard this statement?
Well, after I was trying to figure out what a lemming looked like, there is a saying, or, for whatever reason, I knew that they kind of travel in packs, I guess. And certainly when in the arts, though community is so important and so essential to what we do, you really do have to find your own way and kind of your own groove, through that path. And and certainly, as Sandra just alluded to, there's a certain kind of loneliness that happens. Maybe, I'm not sure if it's a thing just that affects studio artists, but I think choosing a path that's not common is hard. And certainly there's no regret. It has been challenging. It's been full of challenges, but there's no regret in doing so. When I look around me now and kind of reflect on the hard work that has been undertaken to get to where I am today.
Oh, I really like what Kari just said. Absolutely true. And what I also realize is that for many, many people working in the craft sector, no matter what your role is, there's a passion there that you just can't deny. So to me, this is also about fulfilling happiness and potential and promise. So you're not a lemming because you're doing something you have to do. It's something you want to do. It's a passion. It's a desire. And even though financially it doesn't even make sense sometimes, you just keep going. You just keep going on with it. And I think that's what differentiates and makes people really individual. Like Kari was saying, everybody gets to it, but just through a different route.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for myself, just echoing Sandra, that I couldn't have not done it. There would have been a kind of gaping hole, I think, if in my life, or, something would have felt very like it was missing if I hadn't pursued this path. And yeah, certainly if it was just about, monetary wealth, it was not necessarily the path to take. But I used to have this argument with my folks all the time that there's more to understanding wealth than money alone. It comes in so many different forms.
Oh, absolutely. And I remember being 22 years old and finishing my undergrad and being offered a full-time job at the provincial government of BC and thinking, wow, no way. So you know what you need to do.
Yeah, it jumps right out and grabs you.
It does. And then you have to go with it, don't you?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it doesn't make sense. And there's lots of questions, internally and that come at you externally, or at me anyways. And beyond, logic, sometimes you just choose to take that next step and you carry on, just kind of, and maybe you're the only one that understands where you're headed or sees that kind of destination. But you have to follow it.
And the other thing I found in my journey is that this is a small community, but it is a very powerful and strong community. And people will take you by the hand, they'll guide you, they'll lead you, they'll inspire you. So, even at point when it felt a little bit lonely or like it's not going to go anywhere, then there's always somebody there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, community is such a huge part of it all. And I think sometimes people walk that line of feeling like that's a community that is either hard to break into or a community that they don't necessarily understand, so they don't necessarily fit into it. But I really think that if people can step over that line just a little bit, and when I say people, I mean, the general public and how they engage with craft, once they step over that line just a little bit, once they kind of peek behind the studio door, or they make that connection between an object in their life or something that they're looking to purchase and the reality of craft, then it's almost something innate. So many people engage with craft or find meaning in it, but often without really acknowledging it to begin with. So I just want to ask, what is something that people get wrong about craft? Or what would you like them to know about it to kind of break that barrier down just a little bit?
Good question, Megan.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think people really understand how much labor goes into some of these objects, that they're witnessing or consuming or, admiring. And certainly I know I've been running community workshop classes recently in the last couple of years, and it's amazing to see people just be completely stunned at learning the process, and it gives them a much deeper appreciation of the objects now, and not even necessarily a metal object, but any kind of handmade object. I think it just gives them that appreciation for the physical experience of having tried to make something. And some of those folks carry on, or they're already in the kind of art sector, but maybe not in the medium that I'm working in. And so that's one way I think that people can kind of cross that line. But I mean, that's a big commitment. I think for the folks that are new to the community, I've always found the craft community in Canada, just so friendly and welcoming. That I think if people just show up at an event, they're going to be welcomed and engaged in a conversation. And I find it friendly and without pretense, and I really appreciate that. And of course, amongst my peers, it's so great to have conversations around the things, the behind the scenes things that we think about, or the challenges that we have. And of course, working alone in the studio, it's so great to have people to reach out to ask questions like, how do you do that? Or what do you think of this? Or, hey, can I get your help with, this thing that I'm working on? There's always somebody that I feel like I can reach out to.
And being a history nerd, I'm always well aware that there's a long, deep, rich history running through the Canadian craft sector. I mean, internationally as well, but locally, regionally. And so when people discover craft, I love it. And sometimes it's frustrating because they've discovered it. So it's brand new and can appear to be something that just is started, when it's just got this amazing, complicated, rich history. And you'll be at events where you'll have 3-4 generations of makers gathered there. And I think acknowledging what people have done before to kind of lay the foundation and guide people through is always important.
Well, and I think back, to the time where we probably lived with mostly handmade objects. I mean, this is way back, but there's that history and kind of evolution as well that I always think about when I'm witnessing objects or appreciating them and thinking about the lineage that all of this work comes from, and I really think that's lost now in our mass industrialized kind of way of things. But I do see a kickback. People are almost seeking it out, like they want that value in the things that they surround themselves with, and it's like this yearning. And I don't even know if people understand what it's about necessarily. But not everybody, but a lot of the people kind of become aware of their surroundings that way.
Oh, and it's exciting to watch people get switched on to craft, like when they discover it. And like you were saying, Kari, when labor is understood and forms of making and inspiration, it's just so joyful.
Mm-hmm. Can you think of an example of a time that you've seen that happen?
Well, I like to think I see it happening every day at the art school. You get people who come into art school, and it's a tough journey sometimes to get to art school. You have to fight a lot of barriers to get there, including parents who want you to go get an economics degree. But once you're there, it's amazing watching people find the crafts and just get completely absorbed by it. Mm-hmm. And then in turn, they'll go and they'll do pop-up shops, or they'll go and put their craft work out in public. And then you can watch the people coming to see it, whether it's their friends or family or strangers. So it's a cycle. And then sometimes we get those people who come to the pop-up shops, they come to take classes. So it's a really nice cycle.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think over the years, having done a lot of craft shows and retail events and kind of being out there in that way, I've developed relationships with people, who may have stumbled across me, in an event that they may have intended to be at or not, or were dragged along, and I've developed relationships with these people. And it's really amazing to watch folks that aren't necessarily makers, but, advocates for the fine crafts and what we do and work so hard at, and the deep appreciation that they have and the advocacy that they take out into their communities of people, and I have one lady I'm thinking of in particular who I met when I was at ACAT in Calgary as a student, and we used to have an event called the seasonal show and sale, and she purchased a work for me at that point in time, which was a big deal as a student, and she's been collecting my work since then. But she also collects the work of all of my colleagues as well. And so, and if you saw her, you would never think that she was a serious art collector or fine craft collector. But it just is so deeply a part of her life. And, she's never taken a class, and I don't think she ever will, but she just is so in love with it, and I've been to her house and it's amazing. She's just surrounded by beauty. And so, I think about her in particular when you ask that question.
Well, you talk, you kind of hit the nail on the head there, and I'm going to pull a quote up that I know Sandra is going to enjoy from everybody's favorite, William Morris. So,
well done, Megan.
I knew I had to do it, right, Sandra?
Yeah, well done. I'm thrilled.
So, have nothing in your house that you do not know to be useful or believe to be beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
The
Absolutely.
Classic. That is the classic.
Yeah. It is.
And I think it goes back to Kari's point about that woman who chooses to surround herself with beauty. So having a group of advocates for craft who are the purchasers, not the makers, but the admirers, the purchasers, the supporters, it goes back to William Morris's ethos. And what I find interesting is he wrote that quote almost 150 years ago. And yet here we are today. It's just as relevant as ever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think we also, often are told or reminded or shown in modern times today that, the idea of minimalism or the idea of purging things from your life that you don't need. But when I think of craft, it's not just stuff. It's objects that we're choosing to inhabit our lives, to have in our rooms, to have in our spaces that are reflective of who we are and that have values behind them. Mm-hmm. So craft doesn't get booted out just because we're living in a world that kind of prioritizes that minimalism. I think it really has a place to play in and amongst that.
Well, I think, the fact that those objects have meaning, and that there's another story or many more stories attached to them other than what they, mean to you. There's the story of the maker, and then the lineage, that maker might have come from, that they don't even understand themselves, the maker that is. And so I think those objects are just so full of life and history, seen and unseen, known and unknown, and if I were to boot everything out of my house, I would have a really hard time getting rid of any of the craft objects that I have, because they have so much meaning and story to them.
It's interesting too, because I think it goes back to history and age, etc. Because older craft objects, I'm just thinking about great grandmother's tea services, things that may have been slightly factory produced but were considered to be really valuable. Those you can find a dime a dozen in thrift shops and things. But for the handcrafted objects that you purchase or that were gifted to you, there is that intimate and direct connection. So I think in a way that is a boon to the craft industry, because every generation is going to make and forge those unique connections to immediate makers. So even if some of the historical stuff kind of gets shuffled aside, there's always room to open up a new connection with an object.
Now, we kind of started this stream of consciousness of thought here, talking about what people get wrong about craft. But I don't want to put all the blame on people from outside the craft world, because, hey, everybody messes up at one point or another, at one time or another. So if you're willing to talk about it, I want to dig a little bit into one of the internet's favorite meme-worthy topics, which is craft fails. So tell me, if you're open to it, tell me a little bit about your biggest craft fail. But then I also want you to follow it up with your biggest craft success. So we're not totally focusing on the failure, but things are tricky sometimes. So Kari, can you share a little bit of craft fail?
Well, the first thing that jumps into my mind, and this might not be the right example, but was a time right after I was done school, I signed up for this event in Edmonton, a city not far from where I live, about 3 hours north. And it was a 10-day arts festival. It was outdoor, and, it was just the worst experience I've ever had. I don't even think I made my booth costs back during the event. And it was a fail in the sense that it just, it was not the right audience. Like the labor it took to explain to people, what they were looking at was just, it was so excruciating, and of course, being fresh out of school, made me question everything my life was about. So 10 days of, non-affirmation, in terms of the work that was being presented. And to boot, it was an outdoor show and 12-hour days. And the whole thing was a really intense, fail, basically.
My first story is similar to Kari's. I remember being down at UC Berkeley, finishing up my degree and doing a craft fair in Sausalito, and thinking that this would be great. And it was the loneliest experience. So you're sitting in your booth, people walking by, and you're like, this is not working. And then, if you get a sale, you're thrilled. But also, trying to explain what you're doing. But on the upside, on the craft success from that craft fair, I remember talking to a lot of people and getting to know a lot of crafters, and realizing that really there's a story to tell here about the difference between art and craft, the support craftspeople had at the time. So I found that inspiring in terms of rethinking what I wanted to do with this.
And Kari, obviously that wasn't the last craft show that you ever undertook. So what was it that made you kind of shake that failure off? And I mean, I've recently seen you at the art market in I believe it was in Calgary. So I know you're continuing to do that work. What helped you overcome that craft fail?
Mostly tenacity and stubbornness, I would think.
Good job.
I mean, I think that's a natural trait to maybe all craft people, maybe metal craft people in particular. Our metals or our materials so hard to work with, but like literally hard. It's a hard material. But I think it was just understanding that it's important to kind of find your audience, I suppose, and try to place yourself in front of them. The other thing I think in terms of a fail that I could relate is I think designing work or making work because you think it's going to sell or people are going to love it, and I know I've done that a couple of times, and those have been miserable failures as well, because I don't think they were coming from the right place. They weren't kind of an authentic expression of, my creative kind of aspirations. So, in any case where I've catered solely to market, what I think market desire might be, has always backfired on me. And so that's really been a great lesson as well, just to, not design to that. Can be I think as a craftsperson, certainly there is a huge degree of commerce involved in, what we do and how to kind of go forward in the world with our work. But I don't think that can be the priority all the time. I mean, in a lot of ways, it's kind of a consequence of what I do, more so than the priority.
From an academic sense, I think my greatest fail was when I tried to put art theory onto craft. I remember as a graduate student, there was always a constant desire to make craft equal with art theory and theorize it. And what I realized was you would go to conferences and you could talk to the other art theoreticians, but the audience that you were missing were all the people who actually cared about it, the craftspeople, the makers, the collectors. So, not abandoning art theory, but understanding that there's a place for craft and there's a role for craft, and it doesn't always mesh easily with something that would be coming from the visual arts sector. So, you don't just elevate craft by sticking theory into it. You have to be nuanced and think about what you're trying to say and the story you're trying to tell.
Mm-hmm. So I do want to focus on the craft successes too, because this is no time to be modest to either of you. I know that you've got many, many craft successes in your history and in your future too. So why don't you talk about, some of the things that have really felt like successes in your career?
Well, I would, point towards my community as a huge part of my success. And certainly it's because of the relationships that, I've been able to carry on with my work, I think. So I just want to acknowledge that, that we don't exist kind of on our own. And the encouragement that I receive, or, maybe accolades, or, just the gentle push sometimes in a different direction from peers or colleagues or mentors or friends, or, even those who aren't allies, all those things push you in directions that make you better, I think. So that is a huge success, to be part of such a great community of people. And I think my ability to communicate and articulate is a part of that. I think there's skills other than making that one has to have to be able to communicate about their work. So I've worked hard at that over the years. And so I think that's big, and how to talk about your work. And I mean, there's more skill that I'd like to develop in that area, but that's a big part of it. But I think in terms of studio successes, for myself, I'm never looking at trends. I'm never watching trends. I just, and it's funny when I do kind of look outwards that way to see the things that are happening, because maybe there is some reflection of what I've been doing inside those things, but I'm never motivated by them. And I actually try not to look at them, and even over the last few months, I've actually taken a break from social media because I find that it actually pollutes my creative abilities to be taking in too much information that way. And so I think one of my greatest successes is just working from that kind of edge of inspiration, and being able to try to stay true to it. And that's true of my jewelry design work as well as my mixed media work, which is developing, and I feel like I'm on the edge of something inside that, and it just trying to create that space for that to kind of percolate and bubble up to the surface.
Yeah, there's really a fine line between inspiration and saturation, right?
Absolutely. And so anyways, I try to, I've had to make a much more conscientious effort recently to maintain and hold that space, just because the world is so noisy around us. But yeah, it's been great.
Well, what a lovely question to ask, Megan. I'm with Kari. I think the community of students and peers around me has been the greatest success, building that community, that network, but also really trying to enhance what we're all doing together. So one of the successes that I know Kari was involved in was our Naked Craft project, where it was so exciting to bring together Scottish and Canadian makers and actually have them interact with each other over a period of time and witness what evolved from that. So examples of things like the opportunity to write a grant or put in an exhibition application that will bring together makers is always, to me, one of the greatest successes and one of the greatest thrills, and a risk too. You never know what direction it's going to go. But Megan, you'll appreciate this. One of the great successes I've had is I've had 2 students put William Morris tattoos on their bodies. And that
that is serious dedication.
that is,
Yeah.
and one of them said joy in labor. I was just thrilled. Yeah. So,
Talk about making an impression.
yeah, literally making an impression.
Well, I told you both not to be modest and go look at your own successes, and then both of you talked about community, which doesn't surprise me in the least. You're both very accomplished people in the craft realm, but I think that drives it home, that little extra bit, that being a part of that community is what really builds up the craft sector. No one does it alone. We definitely have our history that's built us through, and then the contemporary acts that keep us going. So, that's what we do at the Canadian Crafts Federation often. That's really the whole purpose of our organization, is to bring people together to have a collective voice and to not just celebrate, but also fight for the craft community to make it a stronger and longer continuing community.
And that's why the Canadian Craft Federation is so vital to this country. I mean, when the Canadian Crafts Council got cut off at the knees in terms of funding and support back in the early 90s, that was really a crippling time. And I'm so proud of what the craft sector has done, because that's taken grassroots efforts to grow and to lobby and to make things happen. And you see the value of it every day.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for saying that, Sandra. That's nice.
Well, it's true. It's darn tootin' true.
Well, and to have the Federation be kind of a meeting point for all of the regional and provincial craft councils and communities, I think helps to solidify that voice, and be that kind of advocacy on the national stage. So
absolutely,
really important. Yeah.
And it ties every single piece of that important community together, from the general public making connections to artists making connections with artists and beyond. It's just so important. It's the thread that binds us, right?
Absolutely. And then it's also important federally, to put craft on the scene as a very vital part of our economic and cultural sector. To keep reminding people, because we can do it as a community for each other, but really, you need that governmental support and legislation and things to actually actively support what we're doing.
I want to start our first ever special segment on the Citizens of Craft podcast. So we're going to go with your classic lightning round. And I think I warned you both, but I didn't tell you what the questions are necessarily going to be. So we're looking for one word or very short answers as quickly as you can give them. And there's no need to explain yourself or give a big history to your answer. Just your gut responses are best. So again, we'll start with Kari, and Sandra, I'll ask you to follow immediately after her with your responses. So I'm going to start off with some pretty easy ones to get us rolling and then build up from there. There's about 20 questions, so time is of the essence. Are you both ready?
Ready.
Okay, ready.
Okay, so Kari first, Sandra second. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Where do you live?
Canmore, Alberta.
Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Where did you study craft?
The Alberta College of Art and Design.
The University of Victoria and Concordia University.
What's your favorite gallery?
The Still Gallery in Toronto.
Well, the Art Gallery Nova Scotia, of course.
Favorite tool?
Oh, my hammer.
My typewriter.
What craft-related book should everyone read?
Well, Crafting Identity, of course, by Sandra Alfoldy.
Oh, Kari, I love you so much. Love that woman. Well, of course, anything by William Morris.
What was your most recent craft purchase?
Probably a ceramic mug. I have a problem.
Oh my God, Kari, me
I have a
too.
problem.
A ceramic mug, and I had nowhere to put it, but I had to have it.
So this is going to be a real rapid fire one. So what do
Okay.
you like better, ceramics or textiles?
Ceramics is kind of, I'm drawn to more naturally, I think.
You can't make me choose.
It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse, I promise. The ceramics or textiles, Sandra?
Oh my God. Well, ceramics, but that's not fair.
Okay, then textiles or metal?
Oh, gee. Well, I guess that's obvious. I'm a terrible textile artist. I did try. I really honestly did try, but metal for me.
I'd have to go textiles.
Okay. Metal or wood?
Oh, that's a tie for me.
Can you say tie? I should have said tie for the last two.
You can't say tie for all of them.
Oh, well, I'll go metal then.
Okay, wood or glass?
Oh, I break so many things. I have to stay with wood.
I'm going to go with glass.
And then final one, glass or ceramics?
Ceramics has got my heart. If I hadn't found metal first, I probably would be a ceramic artist.
Yeah, ceramics.
Mm-hmm.
What piece do you wish you had made yourself?
You know, I recently saw Peter von Tiesenhausen's solo show up at the Art Gallery of Alberta, and he made this giant necklace. So he uses a lot of industrial waste products, a lot of cast off metal pieces and such. And so there was a giant necklace he'd made out of old pipe, and I think it might have been a rebar. Anyway, I mean, it was huge. That piece, that piece.
Sandra?
I wish I'd made Renee Lalique's Dragonfly Woman. Wish I'd had that vision, the big corset Art Nouveau piece.
Good choice. So this one, I know Sandra will have something in the back of her mind. But Kari, what's your favorite quote?
You know, I love poetry, and Michael Ondaatje is one of my favorite poets. He's a Canadian poet, and there's a line out of one of his poems, and it's "We are new and ancient here."
And Sandra?
Oh, I have to go with William Moore's Joy in Labor. I mean, isn't that what it's all about?
So what is your greatest weakness?
Well, other than ceramic, probably chocolate.
Oh my God, Kari, I was going to say the same, ceramic or chocolate. Preferably ceramics that hold chocolate.
Yeah, it's perfect. I'm with you.
All right, just a few more questions left. If you weren't an artist, what would you be?
Maybe a philosopher.
Am I allowed to say a historian?
Maybe if you weren't a historian, what would you be?
If I weren't a historian, I'd definitely be an artist.
Does your family understand what you do?
It's taken about 20 years or more, but I think they're okay with it now. I'm just talking about my folks in particular, but yeah, I think they do have a really great appreciation for what I do now. But it's taken, they've had to come along, to see the proof in the pudding, I guess.
And I've had a distinct advantage because my parents have been behind me the entire way.
Who had the greatest influence on you?
Early on, I had an aunt and uncle who were arts advocates, and they were the people that were kind of standing at the crossroads, when I chose to take this path, and they were they were like signposts, I guess. They really helped me a lot. And then I'd already mentioned him, but my friend Peter von Tiesenhausen, who's a well-known artist in Alberta and probably nationally, internationally, has been a big influence in my life, and just with great advice, in terms of staying true to your integrity, your artistic vision, and, just as an example too for in terms of his own practice. And even though he's in the fine arts, he definitely has a kind of craft influence in the work that he does.
Mine would be Dr. Catherine McKenzie, because she was my PhD supervisor and she was unafraid to take on a craft topic, which at the time was seen as something pretty crazy to do.
Lovely. And our last question, what would you tell your younger self?
Have faith.
The end of our lightning round bell.
Impressive.
So, It wasn't the fastest lightning round that I've ever seen, but here in craft, we like to do things slow. So this is our slow craft version of the lightning
That's
round.
right.
So thank you for
Slow
playing
lightning.
along on that.
That
I
was
really wanted to mention that last question because the question of what would you tell your younger self, it kind of leads toward the end of our time together. But I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're working on next. What do you want to be your craft legacy? What's the next thing that's coming down the pipe, or your long game dream?
How much time do we have?
yeah, that's right.
Well, for myself, we've been through a big period this year of kind of reevaluation and recalibration in terms of my practice. And I've been, for a number of years now, I was doing retail shows for a period of time, and then to wean myself off of those shows because I have a young son and I wanted to be at home more, I've taken on a lot of commission work. And so that has been wonderful, and it's afforded me to make a living at what I do. But creatively, it's been very hard. I feel like some of my creative muscles have atrophied. So that's been my reevaluation this year. And I'm wanting to phase that out, which is kind of scary because it's kind of like my day job right now. But I just know artistically and creatively that needs to happen. And so I'm in the process of doing that and streamlining my production line to kind of have a effortless kind of wholesale and product line happening that I'm hoping to move online for the most part, or wholesale situations. And then I'm busy creating space for the development or the continuation of my mixed media work, which I just have this kind of undeniable compulsion to be working towards. And Sandra, earlier I was saying to Megan, you're probably one of the people that knows that area of my work the best, since you curated.
Yes, it's wonderful.
Some shows, which
Powerful
has been a huge
stuff.
affirmation. Thank you for me. And so I'm really wanting to push that, in terms of the intersection of materials and processes and skills, but also content.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stories that you're telling are so important.
Thank you. Yeah, and they feel, they're just, I can't deny them at this point. And so, and it's an interesting time for these stories, which, are all about cultural identity and acculturation, appropriation and such. It just seems like it's a ripe time to be working with that material, with the conversations around reconciliation and, migration and the history of our country and just history in general that way.
I'm working on a book called Craft Washing, which is looking at the uses and abuses of craft by corporate culture. So I'm excited about wrapping that one up. That'll be coming out with Bloomsbury Press in the next year or two. And ceramics, we're doing a big Walter Ostrom retrospective at the Art Gallery Nova Scotia, which will travel the country and hopefully internationally. But I've got a new project, which is just in its nascent stage, called Uncommon Craft. And what we're hoping to do is take the crafts from the 1851 Great Exhibition and have the Commonwealth countries and the global population that were involved in making those original crafts revisit them for the 125th anniversary of the Great Exhibition. So that's something we're working on and pretty excited about.
Oh, wow.
Or sorry, I should say 175th. Got my numbers wrong there. But yeah, so that'll be a global project. I hope will be coming together over the next, I think we've got a 5-year plan.
All right. Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here with us today and for going through this whole conversation. I'm really hopeful that people connect in and hear what you two have to say and what our future speakers have to say on the podcast, and get a sense of kind of the reality of what's going on in craft and the people who live within it and live by it and live for it. So thank you both so much.
Well, thank you, Megan, and the Canadian Craft Federation. That was really fun.
Today's episode of the Citizens of Craft podcast has been made possible through funding from the Canada Council for the Arts and with the support of the many members of the Canadian Crafts Federation. Thank you to the artists who shared their thoughts and their time with us today, and thanks to all of you out there who took the time to listen. Continue the conversation online and see work from today's guests on the Canadian Crafts Federation Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram accounts. While you're out there on the web, be sure to visit citizensofcraft.ca. There you'll see the profiles of over 600 professional craft artists. You can search by artist, medium, and location, even your own postal code, to connect with artists where they live and work across the country. Are you a maker? A lover of all things craft? Want to make a local connection? Look up your provincial or territorial craft council today. And join us next time on the Citizens of Craft podcast. Until then, craft on.